I'm not going to keep you in suspense. The top 5 bindings for carving snowboards are, in no particular order, the GNU Fastech, the Head RX2, the F2 Eliminator, the SP Mountain, and the Flow NX2. What do these 5 bindings have in common? Well, they are all rear entry bindings. Why is this important for carving? Because rear entry bindings don't have a heel cup. Standard binding, like this now O-drive, has a fairly large heel cup. And in fact, this is going to add about 16 millimeters to the total length of your boot plus binding versus any of these rear entry bindings. And that is going to contribute to boot drag. And you may think 16 millimeters is not that much, but that's 16 millimeters I can take out of my board with. And a narrower board is just going to be easier and more nimble edge to edge. It's going to be lighter, all kinds of benefits. I'm not riding wider boards because I love wider boards. I'm riding wide boards because boot drag is the bane of my existence in winter. So, from my perspective, a rear entry binding is essential for hard carving. If you like to do some other kind of riding, then go look at someone else's YouTube videos and take their top 5 bindings list. But this is my list, these 5 bindings. We'll talk a little bit about each of these, and we're going to look at some other bindings and binding systems and talk about where I think bindings should be going for higher performance carving. So let's begin by briefly looking at these 5 rear entry bindings. As far as I know, these are the only 5 bindings on the market. First thing to note is that 4 of them, that is all of them except for the flows, seem to me to be made in the same factory. I only have 3 of them here, but I have seen and hand flexed all of them. And in my opinion, the Head RX2 is the stiffest of the, I guess they're called Fastech. They seem to be more or less all the same to me. They seem to be quite soft. The SP Mountain, for example, is advertised as a stiff binding, but look at the flex on this high back, right? I mean, that's not a carving binding. This binding they sent me to test out. I was very curious to see how it works. And I have to say, it's just not stiff enough for me. So I'm gonna mount these actually on my all-mountain board as soon as I'm done with all these testings, and I can take off these NX2s and put them on my ASIM. That, I think, is a perfectly well-suited binding for that. For riding POW, it doesn't matter how big the heel cup is. I'm not dragging in powder in a way that's really going to be detrimental. So any binding really would be fine. In terms of boot drag, at least, I have obviously very strong opinions on all of these bindings and many more. We'll get to some of those opinions soon enough. But of these 5 rear entry bindings that are available on the market right now, the Flow is by far the stiffest. And when I choose my bindings for carving, there are basically 2 factors I'm looking at. How stiff is it, and how much does it contribute to boot drag? All of these 5 bindings contribute to boot drag about the same amount, which is basically nothing. And which one's the stiffest is the Flow. So that's what I like to ride. This is not a perfect binding. I do have a lot of issues, and I think it would be very easy to improve this binding a lot, quite easily, to make it more suitable for the kind of hard carving that I do. But that's not the subject of this video. I want to talk about these Fastech bindings real quick. These are fairly well designed. It's quite similar to the Flows, except they have an automatic release here. See that? Buckle comes up, so you only have to undo 1 strap instead of all 3. I usually loosen these up every time I pop out of the Flows and then tighten them up again. This is sort of meant to be a fix it and forget it type binding, right? So you can kind of set this up and then you just kick in, flip this up, pull that, clip this, and you're done. I personally, having tested these with the SPs, I'm not a big fan of the fix it and forget it kind of mentality. I'm looking for the highest performance I can get. I'd like to crank my bindings pretty much as tight as they'll go. Yeah, I'll lose a little circulation and maybe suffer a little pain in my feet while I'm riding down, but then I loosen them up on the chairlift. These heads and also the SPs, they're more difficult to loosen and tighten on the chairlift. So it's like there's really no benefit to me of the fix it and forget it. Having said that, when I do mount these on that Never Summer, they're going to be fine, because in powder I don't need that full-on cranked feeling and all that stiffness. So the fix it and forget it might be beneficial. If you look at the fix it and forget it versus just a regular rear entry like the Flows, or you look at a system like the Burton Step-On, it's like, how much longer does it take to get in and out? 1 second, 1.5 seconds? It doesn't matter. I'm going to make up that time tenfold by being slightly aggressive in the lineup. Now, not European aggressive, Canadian aggressive, okay? This is how I roll. So, yeah, so fix it and forget it, you know, fine, if I'm not sacrificing anything else. But in general, I'm happier with the Flows. What do we want to look at next? Let's have a look at this step-on system, okay? This is quite popular. So this is Martina's boot. It's a size Mondo 23 in the correct size step-on binding. This is also Martina's boot, also a size 23 in the Head RX2. Can you see that difference? That is massive. And I measured this just half an hour ago, and it comes to 27 millimeters different. That heel cup, this binding is going to add 27 millimeters to her overall length of Boot Plus binding. And like I keep saying, that's 27 millimeters. She needs to add back in the waist of her board to have the same amount of boot out potential. Not worth it. Not worth it, right? The Head RX2 is quite stiff. It's stiffer than the SP Mountain. It's stiffer than the GNU, and it's stiffer than the F2 Eliminator. And I gotta say, I was really quite disappointed when I saw that F2 binding, because F2 makes hard boot boards. They make race boards. They're a carving company. And yet, their binding is floppy like a freestyle binding, a park binding. And I don't understand why. But I would really like to see them make a stiffer binding that's really in the range of something that I would ride. What else? Quick mentions here of the Nidaker Supermatic, which is a very popular step-in binding. So whereas in Martina's size at least, this Burton Step-On will add 27 millimeters, a Nidaker Supermatic will add 32 millimeters. And it's just like, right away, all of these step-in systems are just eliminated. They're not for carving. They're just you're gonna drag your heel cup. So like, why bother? Like I said, I'm looking for high performance. I don't mind an extra 1.5 seconds getting in and out every time. I want the highest performance binding I can get. If you have issues, mobility issues, it's awkward for you to bend down and fasten a binding or sit down and stand up again, fine, a step-on system is maybe for you. However, and I'm going to show you this little clip real fast, this binding, this NX2, I bought this last year because I had an injury in my elbow, and this was the only binding I could find, you know, without a massive heel cup, that I could get into and out of with one hand. So even if you have some mobility issues, you're still better off with a rear entry binding than a standard binding, because I don't need to combine those buckles together, right? I just leave these on, loosen them up to kick in, clip this up with one hand, crank these as far as they'll go, I'm good to go. Something else I want to talk about with all these step-in binding fads, okay? I think there are 4. There's the Burton Step-On, the K2 Clicker, the Nidaker Supermatic, and the Clue binding. Of these 4, now they all have heel cups, right? But of these 4, the Burton Step-On and the K2 Clicker have a feature that I really like. It's that this boot is really well attached to the binding. There is no potential for heel lift here, which is problematic in some bindings, right? So that's a great feature. There's just direct pull from that heel as you engage on your toe edge, and I really think that's great. The issue I have with this is, why did you need to build a heel cup, a high back and a heel cup into this binding, right? If you want to attach your boot directly to your board, there are ways to do it. What is the high back for, right? If you want to achieve a particular flex or a particular performance, why not just build that stiffness into the boot, right? My opinion is they built it in this shape with a heel cup and a high back so it looks like a regular binding. It's for marketing. It's not because it's higher performance. There are other ways to attach a boot to a snowboard. I'm going to show you one that I really like in a moment. But in the meantime, so I see this and I see Burton is just trying to sell you what they think you want to buy versus what actually works high performance. And yeah, that's classic Burton. You come to expect that kind of thing, right? Yeah, so thumbs down for Burton on the step-on. And I'm seeing other companies now, like Union is making their own step-on compatible boot and binding. And I'm just like, you know what? Show some balls, Union. Design your own. Make it better. What's the heel cup for? What's the high back for? You don't need those at all. You can build whatever flex and stiffness you want into the boot, right? And then, okay, it doesn't look like a regular binding, and maybe that's going to hinder your sales a little bit, but when people see what the performance is, you will not have a problem, especially if you make a boot that's stiff enough for the kind of hard carving that I do on these big stiff boards. I would like to show you another step-in binding system real quick here. This here is the Trench Digger 3 FinTech step-in binding from Bomber. It's a hard boot binding, yes, but before you skip to the next video, there's a point I'm trying to make here. It's not about trying to get you to ride hard boots, okay? Look how easy this is to get in, boom, and look how easy it is to get out. Talk about mobility issues. I just, you know, it's right down at your ankle, and I've seen guys extend that line up here with just a knot in their pocket, and they can just kind of pull on their pant leg and pull it out. Super easy and fast in and out. Another awesome feature of this system, not just the binding, but the boot. Here, check this out. This is my backcountry boot. It's a ski boot, right? With the Dynafit pins for the toe. Awesome, right? But it's long, right? Skiers don't care about the length of their boots. In fact, a little extra boot length gives you more leverage into your turns, so it's not a bad thing. These boots are the same size. You see what I'm talking about here? Okay? Snowboard boots should pay more attention to the boot sole length and to the shape of the boot sole, because of course, whatever's down here in the corner is going to drag more than up here, right? So that's kind of what I wanted to show you with this. And there's one other thing as well, because Bomber also makes what they call a sidewinder, which is the same binding, but it's on a pivot point longitudinal across the foot here, and it pivots back and forth like this with some rubber bumpers. So yeah, I never liked them, but lots of people ride those, lots of hard boot riders. And what's interesting to me is the Now O drive is somewhat similar, right? It has the skate tech, but the pivot, the line of pivot here, pivot axis on the Now O drive is perpendicular to the pivot axis on the Bomber Trench Digger Sidewinder. So I'm just like, how does this even make sense? Did either of these companies actually do any testing and figure out what's the best axis for that pivot? I don't know. For me, I like them tight. I don't want any pivot. But when I look at this, I just like why? Having said that, this is one of the most comfortable bindings I've ever ridden, but it's not high performance and not a carving binding. What else did I show you? Oh yeah, this is actually quite interesting. This is a binding I really like. This is one of Evelyn's bindings, okay? Super cheap board, super cheap binding, but check it out, okay? This binding has no heel cup either. It's not a rear entry, it's a normal entry binding. What I'm getting at is somebody should design a binding in this style. Then you don't have to worry about rear entry, phase, multi-entry patents or anything like that. This is open, okay? You could bring this up way higher. You could redesign this so it's way stiffer. And then you have a relatively normal binding, but without the heel cup, but with the same performance, right? If you're going to use aluminum or some composites, carbon fiber, you can achieve whatever stiffness you want. You don't really need the heel cup. What else? What other bindings we want to look at here? I actually would like to show you this binding. This is a Ride CAC. It's about 20 years old. I don't know exactly when they produced this, but a couple things I want to point out about this binding. First of all, is how rigid bindings used to be. Oh my goodness. You know, when people talk about the Drake Podium that I have here, or the Union Atlas, and they say, oh, this is a super stiff carving binding. These are not super stiff bindings. This is like a medium stiff binding. By today's standards, yeah, okay, maybe it's a stiff binding, but if you go back 20 years, 30 years, this was a normal binding, super stiff. And I don't understand why they went to all this soft stuff in the middle, and I'm glad to see that at least Flow is coming back with something stiff. This is by far, this Flow NX2, by far the stiffest binding on the market. Nothing even comes close, nothing I've seen anyway. But really I wanted to show you this binding because it actually has 4 little pads, one in each corner, and it's adjustable. You can fire in this screw and then you can adjust the cant and lift in your individual binding. Fantastic. Why did we lose this technology? Honestly, if you could make this brand new, I would ride this if it weren't for the heel cup. This is the last binding I want to show you today. This is a Barfoot 151 with Barfoot bindings from circa 1986. And it's really quite filthy from spending so much time in my garage. But this binding has 2 straps. It has a high back that folds down. It has a heel cup. It has multiple positions where you can mount it. This is fundamentally the same binding as any of these high back bindings. There has basically been little to no innovation in bindings in 40 years. So I'm not super impressed. I see so much potential here, so much potential. Why are we still using high backs? Why can't we build that stiffness and that flex into the boot? Why can't we make, like the clicker, the fastening part under the boot? And make that whole boot narrower, cut away the sides, you know, like is done in these hard boots. There's a lot of room for innovation. Bomber is working on a new soft boot binding. Jason Talanian is working on the edge lever soft boot binding. There are people innovating, but unfortunately it's not really the big companies. And when the big companies are innovating, I think they're looking more from a marketing perspective than a performance perspective. And as a serious carver, that kind of bothers me because I would like to be riding better bindings. I see so much potential, and I'm just, I'm stuck with what's available on the market now, and somewhat disappointed with that. So I end up using things like boot stiffeners. Sometimes I use this volleyball shin guard or soccer shin guard behind my boot. This is JCJ Anderson's custom carbon lateral boot stiffener for the front foot that would just go inside your shell and your liner would sit on top, and that would give you some extra lateral stiffness. And straps, of course. Why do we need this? Why can't they just build a stiffer boot that steps on the board, that's lower profile and higher performance? It should not be that hard. And one more time, I'm happy to work with any company that wants to develop a higher performance binding specifically for carving. Yeah, mostly because I want to ride that binding and that boot. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I have to say. That's my top 5 binding video. I do have a bunch of boards for sale. I'm pretty much finished testing these now. 1, 2, 3 JCJ C4 and C3 162s. I've got a few in the back here and a few on this side that are for sale. I'm going to put all of these on the website so you can get more information about each of these boards. I would really appreciate if you would buy these boards. I know the season's ending, but I can have any of these shipped within a day. You can be riding them within a week. And it basically frees up my capital to go and buy new prototypes. I have 5 more prototypes I'm expecting before the end of the season. And I'm not going to lie and say, oh, I'm doing all this testing for you guys. I'm doing it for me because I want to be riding the best possible boards. However, it is quite time consuming and it is expensive. I pay for all of these boards. And when I can resell them, that makes it possible for me to buy another batch of prototypes and keep progressing. So in the end, everybody's going to benefit. So yeah, show your support, buy a board, and yeah, hopefully the season's not ending where you are. Here we've got about 5 more weeks, and there are always some high elevation places. I expect to be riding right through May, whether that's Breckenridge or Sunshine Village. We'll see what the conditions are like. But yeah, after closing day, I'm going to travel a bit, and I want to extend this season as far as possible. I think some of you know what I'm talking about. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Take it easy. Carve some turns.